Hello, welcome once again to Android Developer Office Hours. This is our special Leap Day version of Office Hours, which occurs only once every 4 years. The first thing I'd like to do is go around the room and introduce people, starting with Alex on my left. And
Hi.
that's Alex. Roman.
How's it going?
And over on my right is Joe.
Greetings.
And I'm also Joe, just to confuse you. So I'd like to remind you of some things before we start. First of all, if you're listening in or you've joined, please +1 us so that we get an idea of how many people are joining us today. The second thing is here in the corner is our little time machine. That's a reminder that we're unable to comment about things that may or may not happen in the future, just as a reminder, and I'll keep you informed of that during the conversation as well. We will go right now to Google Moderator to take a look at our first question of the day. It says, would like to know what the best way to implement a list view like the one in ICS People app is. That is, a list view with section headers that stick to the top of the list view until a new section header comes along.
I can take a crack at that. So currently the best way to do this is probably to look at the source code for the Contacts app. And it should be out there now. I don't know if it's probably not called people.git, it's probably still called contacts.git. But that's probably the best place to look. There's no real framework support for anything like this, and I'm personally not aware of any libraries that do this, but that's probably the best place to look. The way it basically works, as far as I remember, and this is a little clunky, but basically every list item has 2 views, and if that list item is the beginning of a section, then its first view, which is the section header, is visible, and otherwise it's not. So it's kind of inefficient. One way to improve that would be basically to do kind of some intelligent work when you inflate the views for each list row. But that's basically the way to do it. There's also another bit to actually get it to be pinned at the top. There's some extra logic there. But long story short, I'd say just look at the contacts.git source code and you'll take a look there. And you'll be able to see how it works there.
Okay, thanks, Roman. We'll move on to our next question. Any idea how Chrome for Android managed to get a back, forward, and favorite button in the overflow menu?
I can answer that one as well. So basically, I took a look at this, and if you have a device that, if you have it in the emulator somehow or on a rooted device, you can open up Hierarchy Viewer. And I actually believe that I think Roman Guy pushed something live or made some sort of public announcement about how to use Hierarchy Viewer on not rooted devices. But basically, Hierarchy Viewer kind of explains what's going on here. If you open up a normal overflow, action overflow window in Hierarchy Viewer, you'll notice that it's using kind of standard things like list menu view or whatever. That's kind of built into the framework. If you do the same on Chrome for Android, you'll notice that they're using custom layouts for every single row in that list. So the back, forward, and star row is a custom list item, and everything else below that is also a custom list item. So the way you basically do this is you create your own custom button that looks like an overflow icon, and we have that iconography available for download. And then when pressing that button, you basically show a list pop-up window, and the standard system action overflow window uses also that list pop-up window stuff. So you use a list pop-up window, and you provide it an adapter that provides basically that first row with your custom actions, and then everything below that is kind of standard list items or standard menu items. So basically, the short answer again to this is that it's custom, and you can do that using list pop-up window.
Thank you, Roman. We'll move to our next question in Moderator. I have a map view that shows data from the net using overlay item. If I zoom or pan on the map before the data is ready, the app will crash. I found a fix to call populate in the constructor of itemized overlay. I just want to understand what's happening here.
I don't have a good answer for that.
I don't know that one off the top of my head.
Yeah, I think the answer to this is probably it's likely a bug in MapView. So the best workaround, it seems like, is and I think there was in the comments to this question there was a pointer to Stack Overflow, and there was not only that but like add focus something or other. So it's probably the case where there's probably a bug in MapView, and it's probably best to just work around it using the publicly known workarounds. But in general around MapView, there are constantly folks working on improvements. So we're hoping to address this at some point, but we can't really mention anything about time frames. But yeah, again, short answer: use the publicly known workarounds for this.
Thank you. Next question from moderator: which is the best way to pass data to fragments? I noticed that arguments are probably not the best way to do this, but they are useful because the bundle is automatically saved and restored on configuration changes. Should we use fragment methods?
Can I take a crack?
From the question, it's a little bit ambiguous because I don't really understand if it means like between fragments or from an activity to a fragment, or like are you intenting into the activity from some other activity and want to pass data straight into the fragment, or
yeah, there's basically a lot of different there's a lot of different cases here to handle. Arguments work really well when you're just instantiating a fragment, but for communication between fragments, there's all sorts of different things you can do.
I would say for communication between fragments, the easiest thing is to have a method in the activity containing those fragments. And so like fragment A can have send data to fragment A will be a method in the activity, and then you just have fragment B call send data to fragment A or something like that. That way you can swap out the fragments as needed, and they don't really need to be aware of each other as much. And just the overarching activity is the only thing that we really need to be aware of what activities are instantiated. Anything else?
Yeah, I think without more context, if the person who asked this question is available to join, then please do and elaborate on the question. But I think without any further stuff, I think it's probably the best we can answer there.
Yeah.
Thank you. Next question. If I had a new method for unlocking the screen, let's say voice recognition, could I create a custom unlock screen application? Or would this only be available for custom ROMs?
Yeah, I don't think it's possible to create a custom unlock screen. As we mentioned in past Hangouts, there are a couple of screens which are kind of sacred. Things like the unlock screen and specifically the in-call screen. Those are difficult, if not impossible, to really customize. So if you're in a position of creating your own custom ROM, or if you're a manufacturer and you need to do something to change that, then that's potentially something you could do in that case. But as a developer, as an application developer, I don't think you really have much control over what goes on the lock screen. But I will mention that in Android 4.0 we added support for remote controls, music remote controls on the lock screen. But that doesn't obviously solve your voice recognition stuff. But there has been work going on recently to improve the lock screen. So yeah, the answer to that is probably no, unless you're doing a custom ROM or custom image.
Thank you, Roman. Next question is, it would be great to be able to upload the corresponding mapping.txt at the same time as an obfuscated APK in the developer console. This would save some work for developers by generating unobfuscated crash reports. Is this possible or invisible?
I think it's a great idea, and I definitely think you should file a feature request.
Yeah, and we just had a hangout fairly recently, right, in the past few weeks, where one of the folks that works on the Android Market Publisher site took some suggestions, and this is actually a good point to announce. We recently published an update to the statistics that you received as part of the publisher site, and a large part of that update was feedback that we got from you folks. So definitely keep on giving us this feedback, and this is definitely something that we can consider for the future. So keep on giving us that feedback. We're definitely listening. I actually want to take a brief moment to make another announcement. If you folks are watching, are designers or anybody in the design field, we just published an update to Android Design, and I just want to briefly mention that, just to take a break from some of the question answering. First, you can, if you go to developer.android.com/design, you'll notice there's a new Downloads tab on the left. If you click on that, you can get access to all the things like the action bar icon, action bar icons, or the color swatches that we talk about in the design guide. But we've also just published stencils for folks using Photoshop or Fireworks or even OmniGraffle. So if you're kind of in the mock-up phase, this should be a huge improvement to your workflow if you're using those tools. For folks using GIMP, we don't have anything right now that's specifically available for GIMP, but I believe that the Fireworks PNG file should work just fine if you open it up in GIMP. And then the second thing I wanted to briefly mention was that you can now, I guess, deeply link into sections of the design site. So as a designer or a developer, if you want to point somebody specifically to, say, the scrollable tabs section of the tabs content, you can just click on the header and get a deep link into that. So that should improve kind of your ability to share links to the design site. So that's just been published right now, about a couple minutes ago. So go ahead and download those stencils, download those new icons, and enjoy.
Yeah, we actually have someone in chat who noticed before you did. Who said, "Awesome update."
Awesome update. Thank you. It's literally hot off the press.
Thank you. Next question. Attributes from a library project aren't accessible from any XML file in our main project. If we specify the library namespace for the attributes, it throws an error. If we don't, the attributes are ignored. It's a well-known bug. Will it be fixed with ADT 17?
I think so I've been tracking this bug, and a few of us have been looking at this, and I think that the answer is, first of all, that the bug was marked as a future release, meaning in one of the next couple of releases or next release of the Android developer tools, this should be fixed. So I'd first of all say that is the source for any sort of information there. So as we've marked it as future release, so it seems like it will be fixed. Whether or not it will make it into ADT 17 is really a question of time. So assuming there's no issues with the implementation, and actually you can test this out. I think that Zav commented that in ADT 17 preview 2, this is already fixed. So assuming there's no issues with the preview, my guess is that it would make it in. But if there are any sort of issues or launch blocking things that come up, then it may be pushed back. So the bug has been internally fixed, I would say.
So let me just add that the preview 2 came out this week. It's actually came out on Monday. You can go check that out at tools.android.com. Download it and check it out. And they also have places for feedback as well. If you find some issue with it, since it hasn't been released yet, it's possible we can get some of those things fixed. So go ahead, check it out, give us some feedback. We'd really appreciate it.
Okay, the next question is quite an interesting one. What does it take to become part of the Android Developer Relations team? Anybody want to answer that question?
Alex. All right.
Alex?
I'm guessing we all have things to throw in here. I would say, let's see where to start. Basically the same rules would apply for any of the developer relations teams at Google, which would be, technically savvy. You need to have genuine enthusiasm for programming. First and foremost is love talking about programming, programming tips and everything, love APIs and code against APIs in your free time. Breathe this stuff. And if you're that type of personality, then in general you'll just be a good fit for developer relations at Google. And for Android developer relations, it's basically the same answer, only, specifically care that much about Android APIs.
Yeah, I'd also say, make a couple of Android apps. That always helps.
Yeah.
But yeah, and also, make sure that you're keeping up with the jobs. I think it's at google.com/jobs, but I think we also have another page specifically for developer relations openings. So yeah, just definitely follow, follow the Google developers account on. Well, actually, just I guess circle the Google developers account and the Android developers account. We from time to time make mention of job openings and things like that.
Thank you. Okay, the next question is it true that Android 5.0 is going to be released later this year? And that's a time machine question, I think, if there ever was one.
Is the time machine fixed yet?
The time machine is not fixed,
Oh.
so we're unable to answer that question. Sorry. Good question, but we're unable to answer it. Thank you. Next question. Is there a clean way to rename an application's package name via command line? I've struggled with regular expressions to achieve this, but I think that method is pretty dirty.
If by clean you mean ADB rename package command, then no, not a clean way. Basically what you would have to do is set up probably a bash script would be my best guess. That would, first of all, it would have to move files around in folders, because package names control, the path, like the nested subdirectories that the source files are actually in. And then it would have to go through and probably using like a tool like sed or awk or something, rename the individual lines that contain the package name in each of the source files. Which, it's possible to write a script that would do this, but it sounds unpleasant. But it seems like that's what you would have to do.
Yeah, and I'm sure, like, if you use an IDE like Eclipse or IntelliJ, there are probably some tools to help in the process, but it's not extremely trivial.
Yeah. Even
I see in the comments that one of our other viewers has suggested a sed actually for one of those things. The question from the person who asked it was, is there an official way to do this? And I think the answer is no, not really.
Nope.
The way I would do it definitely is if you're using an IDE, it's pretty simple. You just refactor the packages, and Eclipse will take care of it. So from the command line, you're pretty much on your own, and sed looks like a reasonable way to do it.
I would say even from Eclipse, I think Eclipse will do like 80% of the job for you, but it'll sometimes it'll leave like a couple files behind, and then a bunch of compiler errors will pop up. You kind of need to go through and do a little bit of cleanup yourself. But you are right though, like that IDE will do it a little bit. Will do most of the job for you at least.
Yeah, that's a good point. Actually, I've done this with a few projects, and one of the things that I remember as a issue is make sure you look at your manifest file,
right?
Because it's got package names in it, and Eclipse won't take care of that renaming for you. So just make sure you check that out. That'll give you some really weird errors that took me a while to figure out too. So
yeah.
just be aware.
Thank you, Joe. The next question seems to be, because there's no way to tell if a person will get into Google I/O for Android training, and people may be planning their yearly trainings, can you recommend the next best Android conference or training?
So I'm not really, so regarding other events besides Google I/O, what I will mention is that from time to time our team, we run Android Developer Labs, and so if you haven't heard of this before, obviously the place to keep an eye out for things is on the Android Developers blog, as well as the Android Developers Google Plus account. So keep track of those. We do it from time to time. We haven't announced any new ones recently, but that's kind of a similar kind of venue to learn about new things in Android and whatnot. But besides events like Google I/O, the Android Developer Labs, I'd say that there isn't really something that we can recommend. There are definitely tons and tons of community events out there, but we don't really have a place, as far as I know, that we can recommend. Anyone else? Yeah. Okay.
This would be a good point of a good time to point out both Roman and myself will be at South by Southwest,
Oh yes.
which would be it's not a full-scale Android training or anything like that, but we are going to have a Lego Mindstorm hackathon. I'll be running a code lab centered on taking a phone app and making it more multi-platform so that it looks good on both phones and tablets and whatever other Android platforms come along. And let's see, Trevor will be giving a lightning talk. I don't quite remember the topic. And there will also actually be Hangout time where you can schedule like a 15-minute block with myself or Roman to talk
And
about
Robert as well, who's
and
off
Robert,
camera.
who's off camera, to talk about anything you feel like talking about. You can reserve 15 minutes of each of our time for fun.
Yeah, and
So-
if you want to show us your apps, or if you want to talk about specific things within your app, we're more than happy to do that.
Right.
It's really your time.
Yeah, I'll talk about analytics on Android with just about anyone, and Roman is famous for talking about UI for as long as we will let him. So,
which hopefully
I see.
Right.
Okay, right. So the law of cause and effect. Okay.
I'll give a super short answer. Hopefully,
ahead.
I can. Right.
Yeah.
If it cancels out again, that was all my fault.
Yeah.
The super short answer is that Google Analytics should be used to track trends and segment data, and not for exact numbers for things like number of installs on a particular day.
Good answer. Thank you, Paul. Alex.
Yeah.
Thank you, Paul, too. I don't think we have a Paul. Just because of
Hire
that,
a
right?
Paul.
Yeah.
So you get into Android developer relations.
Yeah.
Have the name.
Have the
Paul.
name Paul, yeah.
Right.
Is there any way to recycle a 9-patch drawable or convert it to a bitmap so that it can be recycled?
Hey John, how's it going? Actually, I know John from some other times, but I don't know if we have a great answer to this. I mean, I off the top of my head don't have a great answer to this. I think that the only thing that I would do to discover what's going on here is to look at the source code for 9-patch drawable just to see what's going on. One thing one thing to always remember to do in general, regardless of which drawable it is, which kind of drawable, is to set callback to null when you no longer need that drawable. So drawables are usually associated with a context, like an activity or such. So set callback null. That may kind of lead you down a path where you kind of find the answer there. But I don't think there's a better answer off the top of my head. If anybody else wants to chime in. Whoa. Yeah, folks, if you're not
Please
speaking,
mute Mike. Thank you. There we go. Thank you.
Yeah, anyone else? Anything else on the 9-patch stuff?
Nope.
Nope.
Could we move forward? Yes. Okay. I'm having an interesting issue with a get a tag lost when attempting multiple transceives via an ISO dep interface. The send part of the transceive completes, but I lose the something or other when it's processing the response. Can I get some detail on this exception?
I have no clue. I'm not sure. This sounds like it's related to NFC, but Stephen, can you unmute and ask your question live, if you're okay with that?
Right.
Stephen is typing. I want to sleep on the couch. All right.
10 p.m. plus 6, baby. That's fair enough.
So I think if you can just post the Stack Overflow question on this, it'll probably be better to resolve it that way. I don't think anybody here.
I'm not familiar with enough with NFC to be able to say off the top of my head. If there's also some like Logcat or Stacktrace that you could throw in there too.
Good point.
To help us track it down.
And JT wrote in that he just missed my question about the 9-patch. So.
Oh, Jonathan, just missed my question. Oh, so he didn't hear the answer. Jonathan, I'll just really quickly restate the answer there. Basically, none of us really have a great answer for you, but look into set callback null. I don't know if that's going to solve your answer specifically with 9 patches, but that and also just look at the source for 9 patch drawable. That'll probably give you more details than we can right off the top of our head right now.
He said tried it. Oops. Okay.
Gotcha.
Well, anybody else? No. Steven said that it's some kind of internal error. I'm thinking the phone is getting bored and just killing the connection. Well, I would just go ahead, as Roman said, and post it on Stack Overflow with a stack trace and logcat, see what we can come up with. Thanks. And we'll move on to the next question on moderator. If I have a service that downloads data in order to manage the screen orientation change properly, how can I store the object? Should I always save and restore them in on-saved instance state and in onCreate methods?
A service or an activity? That's my confusion there.
I don't think services get destroyed on screen
Yeah,
change.
they definitely don't.
Activities do.
So I'm guessing that this is actually like if I have an activity that downloads data in order to manage configuration changes. So there's a couple of things you can do there if you're referring to activities. First, in general, if it's a large amount of data, you don't want to be doing it in the activity. You want to be doing it in something like a service. If it's really just a very trivial amount of data, if it's trivial amount of I guess if it's something that is really tied to the activity, tied to the view, then there's a couple of things you can do. First, you can use the very aptly named onRetain non-configuration instance to pass along large objects that specifically aren't associated with your context. If you have something like a drawable, which is associated with the context, and you pass that between activities, then you're going to leak your activity. But if it's something that's like a media player object or something that's heavyweight, that's not tied to your context, then you can use onRetain non-configuration instance. The second thing I want to mention is that method, I believe, is actually now deprecated in favor of fragments. So you can basically have a non-visual fragment that holds onto that object and have that fragment retained. So there's retained fragments and non-retained fragments. And if you create a fragment that has no UI and set it to retained, then basically that single fragment instance will be transferred across orientation changes. So that's probably the correct way to do it now, but also just keep in mind that if you're doing a lot of data processing, something that is not really tied to the activity, then you want to do that in a service.
Thank you, Roman. We're going to move to the next question here. I have an issue when applying a paint with stroke to canvas.draw text on path. It does not look correct, and there's a link to a Stack Overflow question.
I think this is one of those methods that is actually not supported under hardware acceleration. So if you have hardware acceleration turned on, then draw text on path may simply not work, or it may kind of just do something weird. There's a blog post on this called Android 3.0 hardware acceleration that talks about some of the methods that aren't supported. So I'm not sure if it's still not supported even in Android 4.0, but that would be one thing to watch out for.
Okay, thank you, Roman. I have an expandable list view activity that I need to add webcam feed to the top row. I have seen advice against using WebView inside a list view. Please recommend a way to implement this layout. Thank you very much.
I would say instead of a web view, if possible, see if you can pull the individual images down from the network. I would say with a background thread that's just pinging the server and grabbing JPEG after JPEG and then updating that list view item. Joe knows.
So you should check out something called Surface Texture. It's a relatively new. I think we put it in API 14. And it's intended for something like this, where you've got a live image that you want to set inside some kind of a layout. So again, the name of the object is called Surface Texture, I believe, and that's probably going to be your best bet for this stuff.
Also texture view, right? Surface texture and texture view.
Surface Texture and Texture View, I can't remember what the name of it is, but yeah, one of those will turn up something in the API, and that's probably your best bet right there.
Thank you, Joe. Okay, let's move on. The next question we just got something on our chat. When I think this is, I can't tell. When I initially wrote my app, I used several activities that contained managed fragments. Then I switched to using just one activity managing all the fragments. Is this a valid approach?
I'll quickly chime in if you guys have other stuff.
Go ahead.
So the question really is, do you have a single activity with, or a single activity with 5 fragments, or say 5 activities with 5 separate fragments? And it's really, I mean, I think the answer is it depends on what you're trying to do. There are some cases where having a single activity manage 5 separate fragments, really is just a lot easier. Especially if you're designing first for tablet. This is actually something that I was talking with Rado about. If you're designing first for tablet, for example, and you have 2 panes, then it really makes it easier to have a single activity with 2 fragments when you kind of port down to phone. If you're starting with a phone app, then you may find that it's a lot easier to have 5 separate activities or 2 separate activities, and then later on 2 fragments, and later on move that into 1 activity on the tablet. But I think it really varies. Some of the cons of having I guess 1 activity with 2 fragments is that the transition between your 2 states, like when you have 2 activities, the transition there is managed by the system, and so whatever system animation or system transition is used between them, that automatically happens. But if you have a single activity with 2 fragments, there's no real way to use that system transition. So you'd have to kind of use a custom transition or something of that nature. But I mean, there aren't that many. Actually, another con, I guess, is with intents. If you do have kind of deep linkable activities that accept different intents, then you kind of have to do this custom, I guess, intent routing logic inside of your single activity. And that can get a little hairy if you're not kind of too certain on how to do that. But in general, it really varies on the use case, is what I'd say.
Okay, thanks, Roman. Next question is, the pop-up menu class introduced in a recent API level does not allow theming. There's a comment in the code about this for a future version. Is there a workaround for this without rolling out my own pop-up menu class?
Not
really.
Yeah, not that we know of. You can always look at the source code. That's probably the best. Well, you already looked at the source code. Yeah, but if you were to do it yourself, then there's a list pop-up window, which actually I don't know if that's themable either, but there's also pop-up window, which is the very generic version of all that, and for that you can provide whichever UI you'd like.
Thank you, Roman. Next question. I have 2 fragments. Frag A has a timer, and Frag B renders an image on the canvas. Frag B only does the rendering steps in sync with Frag A. Is it possible to draw on UI asynchronously for 2 fragments, or do both fragments run on the same UI thread?
It's a little hard to parse that question. So in general, the entire UI, and fragments, again, remember that fragments aren't always pieces of UI. Fragments are really lifecycle constructs that may own a part of your view hierarchy. So think of it this way, like if you have 2 panes on the screen, you may have 2 fragments that act as the controllers for the controller logic for those panes, but really those panes are simply views in your activities or in your Windows view hierarchy. So they're not really 2 separate pieces of the UI with 2 separate threads. So what you're saying there is, the short answer to the last part is, your fragments in general are running on the same thread, the main thread. I don't know if crude way of putting it, but And the first part with the timer, I'm not really sure. Do you guys follow what's going on there?
Well, I think there's a timer in one fragment, and the view in the second fragment is being updated based on the timer in the first fragment.
Oh, one thing to note is that the timer, I believe a timer actually spawns its own thread. So if you have a timer, that's creating a separate thread. So you may be doing, that may be where you may be confusing the two threads. Generally, a better way to do this is to use message loops or message passing. So use kind of like a post delayed or a post message and along with a handler, and then have that handler do the updates so that everything stays on the UI thread. If you're doing complex work, like really complex computations or blocking operations like network stuff in there, then you may not want to do that. And maybe a timer is the right approach there. But this seems like you probably want to use that instead, and that keeps everything on the main thread, which does all your rendering.
Thank you, Roman. Our next question is, hi, users on Galaxy Nexus are reporting broken fonts in Stock Launcher when using my app widget. I found these errors and logs multiple times. OpenGL Renderer is out of memory. How can I optimize my app widget to be less demanding for OpenGL Renderer?
I don't know.
I'm not sure. I'm curious what broken fonts actually means. Like if there's a font that, like if maybe you're using a font that you're expecting to be on the system that isn't, or there was that earlier question about the draw text on path, which if you're using hardware acceleration will probably not render the text correctly. I've seen this actually. It looks sort of weird in hieroglyphic. Like Unicode exploded in your UI or something. It's odd to look at. But without knowing more about what broken font means and without seeing any sort of stack trace, I don't know how we could answer more specifically.
Right. Go ahead.
So one of the challenges with working with OpenGL is debugging the code and working on figuring it out, because it runs separately in kind of lower levels of the stack there. One thing you should try to check out, there are OpenGL debuggers out there. I believe you can get one from NVIDIA. It's got a pretty good suite of tools to use. So I would try executing your OpenGL code and debugging it in one of those environments first, and then once you're happy with its performance and and you think you've plugged all the memory leaks and whatnot, then bring it back into Android, especially if you're doing something pretty high end with OpenGL. Yeah, and to try to without actually kind of looking at your code, it's going to be hard for us to kind of tell you what the real answer is, but there's an approach you could take.
Yeah, I would also say that it's worth posting this on Stack Overflow, because we have one question where we can't really tell what exactly is going on. You say it's reporting broken fonts, and it would help to have a more detailed explanation.
Along with an image.
Along with an screenshot would be very useful. And also you ask optimize app widget to be less demanding for OpenGL Renderer, and it's difficult to answer that question without knowing what's wrong or what sort of things you're running into to begin with. So the basic answer I would always give is we need to get some more information, and I think you've heard some of that. So, okay, we have a question that's come up on chat, and the question is, what is the best approach for immediately terminating a long-running HTTP connection, long polling, without having to wait for it to time out?
Is there? I mean, this is pushing the boundaries of my knowledge of network stacks, but shouldn't there be kind of like a close method or kind of like a teardown on your TCP sockets? I mean, this may be abstracted if the you would hope. I guess not. So yeah, if there's nothing in the public interface for HTTP connection or whatnot to give you access to that kind of lower level TCP stuff, then the answer to that may be just no. But yeah, it may be again something that you may want to ask since none of us really have a definitive answer.
Right.
You may want to ask on Stack Overflow.
He said you would hope. I ended up creating a service that I kill manually, but he feels dirty. Well, I understand that. I have a tendency to feel that you pretty much have to set your timeout to be shorter if that's what's happening. A lot of the times I see apps hung and it's pretty obvious that there's something going on in HTTP that they simply can't interrupt effectively. I'd post it on Stack Overflow and see if anybody else has some ideas. To me, it's as much a question of HTTP as it is of Android. So you might get an HTTP expert there that could give you an answer. Okay, let's go back to moderator for a moment. I have a long-lived activity, an alarm clock display that runs a background thread reading a sensor via Bluetooth. In the middle of the night, the activity gets killed without a forced close. Why might that happen? Are there system restrictions on runtime or CPU time?
Well, the first thing you want to do is, I mean, if you actually have a need to keep the activity awake and keep the system awake, I mean, you should probably look into, I guess, wake locks, or there's actually a flag on the window that you can set, or a flag on the view, on any individual view in your window, you can set called keep screen on. But once the screen is off, if there's no wake lock, if there's no CPU wake lock, or if there's no screen wake lock, you're basically not guaranteed anything about the lifetime of your activity. The system may kill you since you're no longer technically in the foreground as far as I know. So look into wake locks and that keep screen on flag. If you don't actually want to keep the screen on, then you probably don't want to be running if you're just displaying something.
Any other comments?
In one of the comments in the poster says that it recommends actually creating a service, and if that fits the parameters, then that's probably a better way to do it, because you've got a longer. If your activity is long-lived and you want it to keep working even though the user's not interacting with your screen, that's a better way to handle it. So.
Thank you, sir. Should we go on to the next question?
So I took a look
Yeah,
at the next one.
go ahead.
The next one is going to be a little hard to answer because there's just a lot of code in the Stack Overflow. We should probably ask folks online if they have any other questions. If anybody would like to unmute.
That's fair enough. Go ahead. Does anybody have a question they want to pose the panel? Here's one. I want to send a message to my activity from a broadcast receiver. The activity might or might not be active. I can think of a number of ways, but how would you recommend I best do this?
So send a message to the activity
From a broadcast
So
receiver.
what's your intended behavior in terms of if the activity is already active, you want to send it to the pre-existing one, or do you want to sort of tear down and recreate the activity based on whatever you receive from the broadcast receiver?
Emila's typing.
Here's why I really wish we had the time machine working.
There
it is. Just want to send a message so activity can update UI if activity is active.
Okay.
You can use a broadcast, right? So broadcast receivers you can declare in the manifest, but an activity can also declare a receiver, at runtime. So basically, in your onCreate or in your onResume, you can start up a receiver, and on your onPause, you can tear it down, and that should work. Is there a specific problem with that approach that you have?
Or are you just looking for some sample code, or not familiar with the mechanism?
Dun, 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 dun.
You know what I find works better than Jeopardy music is the Katamari Damacy music.
Never heard of that.
Na 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 na.
Yeah, sorry.
You've never
Okay,
played Cat
here it
Donald.
is. Nope, just felt that I should run into problems if no receiver is active in activity.
Okay.
Oh, so that should be fine. I mean, if nothing, it's a broadcast, right? If nobody is there to listen to the broadcast, then it should be fine. Then again, if 99% of the time there's nobody there to listen to the broadcast, then you may be just kind of useless or wasting resources, the minimal amount of resources that the system has to figure out which receivers are available for broadcast. But if that's the case, if most of the time there isn't an activity, then you may want to set some sort of configuration option or like some sort of preference saying my activity is active or something. But I think it's fine to basically fire off a broadcast and have the activity create a receiver dynamically or programmatically. Sure
You're
thing. Glad to
welcome.
help.
Thank you. You want to go back to moderator, or do we have any other questions online?
Anyone else?
No? Yes? Bueller? Yeah,
Bueller.
thank you. No, let's go back. I am developing a chat type application. I'm using 2 different 9 patches for chat, bubble, and main message and responses, and facing problems formatting the bubbles. He's already posted the problem at Stack Overflow.
Yeah, so from what I'm seeing, and it's kind of hard for folks publicly to see this, but if you go into the moderator, there's a link in this question, and basically what it looks like is there's kind of chat bubbles, and the right bubbles are all the same width, and the left bubbles are dynamic widths. So my guess is that this isn't really a 9-patch issue, and this is probably more a view and layout issue. I don't know exactly what will be causing this, and I unfortunately can't compile layout XML in my head, so it's going to be very hard to answer this one here without going into more depth. But I would say that I would not kind of think of 9 patches. Look at the layouts that you're constructing. The layouts may actually be relative or something. They may be kind of aligning themselves for some reason.
Okay, thanks, Roman. There's a question of, I am developing a game, would like to know what the best way to create a live wallpaper style background. Is it better to use Surface View on Draw or GL Surface View OpenGL? Here's the full question in Stack Overflow.
Depending on what you're doing, again, part of the answer is it depends, right? If you're looking at doing something very graphically intense, probably you're looking at GL Surface View as your best bet. If it's not so complicated, then yeah, maybe look at GL Surface View. I'm looking at the question in Stack Overflow, and he says that he's looking at something possibly using RenderScript, but he's trying to target level API level 7 or 8. So I would look at GL Surface View. It's going to be a little bit of a learning curve. I'll just warn you if you haven't used that stuff before, but it will probably do anything that you really need it to. You're going to have to put some cycles into it. So that's I think my best answer, unless anybody else wants to tackle that one.
I don't know this one off the top of my head. I'm not really a GL person.
Thank you, Joe.
Running, by the way, we have about 3 minutes left. So
Okay.
Okay.
Let's
Speed
see.
mode.
Okay, speed move. Custom list view adapter with dynamic view pie chart addition. The size of the new view reduces while we scroll list view. The detailed Stack Overflow question is linked.
This raises all sorts of red flags in terms of interaction. It's generally not a good idea to change the size of something as you're scrolling. The other thing is that if you're trying to change the size of something, that generally involves doing a layout, performing a relayout. And if you're doing that on scroll, like if you're overriding like compute scroll or something, then that's going to be extremely inefficient. So my extremely naive answer without looking at all the details is to find a better way to do this interaction. I don't really know the details here of what's going on, but I'd raise that as the red flag, I'd say, without going into further details.
Okay.
And somebody's typing, it may be the same answer. or the same question asker, Garrett Sibi.
Do you have any tips to make the emulator faster?
Run it on a super fast computer.
There are a couple of things like around if you're emulating a tablet form factor, a couple of things around like increasing your memory size and things like that. But I think that's all been documented. The other thing is, there's been work that we mentioned. I don't know during which conference or whatever, but there's work on improving the emulator speed, so it should be improving in the future, but we can't really mention a time frame.
Thank you. And we have a question. I need an offline chart component in Android SDK. Where is it?
There isn't an official one. There's a very popular open source Java charting project called JFreeChart, and someone wrote an Android port for that called AFreeChart, one word. And if you just Google for that, then you should find it.
Great answer.
And for the online component of that, there's always the Google Charts API, and it was very explicit that you wanted an offline component, but just in case for those watching, if you need online charts, that is one option.
Another great answer. Great, thank you.
And I think it's 3 o'clock, so maybe one more?
Okay, we'll do one more. Take a look at this bug. Basically, I think that starting from ICS, when the keyboard is open, soft keys need to be minimized to avoid mistyping and leave more space for app.
I'm at a loss of words. Lost for words.
I'm not really clear on.
Yeah, I'm not very clear on what this means either. So we first of all have to take a look at the bug, I think.
The bug says, when I type on my phone on the Galaxy Nexus, I sometimes hit the home button when I try to tap the space bar. This can be easily remedied by minimizing the back. Okay, so this is really, it's not really a developer question. It's a product question. We're constantly looking at ways to improve the simplicity and usability of the core operating system, as well as all the different apps and the soft keyboard. So this is good feedback. Thank you, but it's not really something that we can comment on in this venue.
Okay. I think that wraps it up for today. Look forward to seeing you all next week. We will be back to regular calendar keeping, and until then, post your questions, please, to Stack Overflow. Thank you very much. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks,
Thanks
folks.
guys.